All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. It's Sunday school, but we're going to talk more general philosophy because I got busy and my neck got to hurting, so I didn't get as prepped as I would like to be. And then I saw something that was the most ridiculous, horrible thing I've seen this week until that stupid football game.
Yeah, well, if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you're always one win away from the playoffs in the last 15 years. So
You knew we were going to
we
find a way
are
to.
we are again one win away from the playoffs, and well, unless they just go on a losing streak. But this is the
Well,
one that they're going to look back
yeah.
on and say, if we didn't lose that game in overtime, that we were up by 2 touchdowns going into the fourth quarter. Russell, Spencer Sanders looked like Seattle Russell Wilson in the first half, and then
hmm
Denver Russell Wilson in the
hmm
second half.
That's a good way to put it.
I mean, it
Well,
was
it wasn't helped by the fact that it looked like they were already trying to run out the clock.
yeah.
Like that,
Well, not
that
only were
opening
they
drive of the fourth
running three
quarter.
times in a row to run out the clock, but they were doing it in a hurry up offense.
hmm They weren't even milking the play clock,
Yeah,
and it
they were
was
still snapping it with 20 seconds left.
and it wasn't even like mix in some screens, which are basically runs, and run it outside. It was just three up the middle and then punt. Okay, well, that's a great game plan.
Well, and apparently whatever groovy drugs they gave him for his injury in the first half had worn off. And you saw that by the end of the third quarter because he was underthrowing everybody,
Yeah,
including that interception there in the fourth.
yeah. I forgot his injury was his arm.
And it should have
Yeah.
been, well, let's start playing the checkdowns instead of let's try to bomb it again when you can't make it 30 yards right now.
Yeah.
Even that one he missed in the last drive to Richardson, that was about a 10-yard out, 15-yard out. That's a long throw for a quarterback because you're throwing not only 15 yards deep, but
Way out. Yeah.
another 20, 30 yards to the sideline.
All right.
Those are usually picked for six.
Well, let's let's see
Not a
where I
good
want to
month for
start
them to
with.
lose. They should have picked November. Then I could have had a drink.
Yep. Yep. All right. So, um, I actually, if we have time, I can actually tie this into what I wanted to into some of my talk on Genesis. If we have time to get there, depends on how ranty you feel. So, one of the places we started for anyone who's for some reason been with us the whole time or has gone back and looked at our old videos is Sam took a deep dive into critical race theory, like actually getting their books and textbooks and reading their own words. Um, and one of the places that has, you know, one of the things that has morphed into is ESG. It's all kind of the same thing in my mind. It comes from the same philosophy.
No, it's not morphed into ESG. The people who designed the ESG score are using
Are
it.
using it. That's a better way to
Yeah,
put it.
yeah.
Yeah. That
Oh no, it the social justice movement is a bunch of useful idiots for the people in charge of
yeah.
the ESG.
You're right. Yeah, CRT is a component to ESG. It's part of the social, as well as a
When
bit of
it's
the governance
beneficial.
when it's beneficial. Yes.
ESG
Yeah.
score changes depending on what's beneficial at the moment.
hmm Right. So let's share this. All
Oh,
right.
let me make it to where you can share. Hold on. There you go.
Keep in mind when people outside of that group of progressive leftist, authoritarian, whatever you want to call them, when people first started talking about ESG, mostly on the right, it was a conspiracy theory and you're a nut. Okay. But then, of course, much like a lot of the other things we talk about, uh, they're saying the quiet part out loud. This is right here on their website. I purposely did not even go to their YouTube channel. I went to their website to pull up this video because it's right there. Our ESG approach.
My name is Piotr Nielubowicz. I'm a member of the board and CFO at CD Projekt. I'm also personally involved in a range of environmental, social, and governance initiatives, ESG for short, and I'm responsible for Teleproject Group's reporting in this matter. I would like to present our strategic approach to ESG issues in the context of our business. This approach reflects our identity and our values. It also takes into consideration the interests of our stakeholders.
All right. That's my first pause there. Stakeholders.
So we have to explain the difference between stakeholders and shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody kind of is familiar with shareholder capitalism because that's what we theoretically have been running under for the last however long almost all of us have been alive. That's where the company makes decisions in the best benefit, financial benefit of the people who own the shares in the company. Makes sense. You own shares, you are basically funding the company in some way, shape, or form, and your wealth grows as the company's wealth grows, so it's in your best interest. Stakeholders are everybody who can be affected by the company. So the big example nowadays is, oil and gas companies are producing oil and gas. Well, if the world is going to end in 12 years, well, everybody's a stakeholder in stopping that. So ESG
because we all
score,
live on the planet.
Yeah, the E in the ESG score, you get a high score if you fight fossil fuels. At the moment, anyways.
Yep. It's a reason that it's a reason why it may seem odd to you if you're not paying attention to this stuff to wonder why, hey, how come all of the oil companies, all of their ads now are all about renewables, and not the come fill up at our station because we've got the good clean gasoline. They don't even do that anymore. It's all our dedication to finding renewables and investing this much in green technology and all this stuff, and that's why. And there's a couple of huge problems with the whole stakeholder idea. Is one, like you just said, it's anyone who can claim to be affected by. Well, there's no 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon here. It's wholly subjective, and any way you can justify it, then it's justified. So long as you have, the bullies behind you and you can enforce your will. The other big problem with it, the first big problem with it really, is that it pushes aside and replaces the idea of shareholders. And I've said this in the past, and it's worth going over again. The saying time is money is not accurate. Money is time. Money is literally a representation of someone's time and effort. Your time and effort, that value is reflected in money.
I would add a third one to that because it's actually necessary for the first two: usefulness, utility. Because I can put a lot of time and effort into something and it'd be completely useless to society and me make no money on it.
That's a good point. It's not just your time and effort, but then the value of your time and effort to others. Well, that means if somebody steals your money, steals your property, they've just strapped you into the life-sucking machine from Princess Bride and stole. So there's a reason, like some of these some of these special interest groups that focus on lower taxes, on tax rates especially, they'll put out like a date that this is the date you're finally earning money for yourself. So like depending on the tax bracket you're in, you had to work into May just to pay the government, and now you're finally working for yourself. So the government just stole 5 months of your life.
Right. You got to play the game right, because meritocracy is racist. And if you believe in merit, then you're racist. And so therefore your S goes down. And so the value you're bringing doesn't matter because you're not socially conscious.
And isn't it funny that the people pushing ESG and CRT are on the left, and the left has long been decrying legislating your morality or legislating morality. Well, that's what you're doing. You're justifying stealing someone's life to push your agenda, to push your morality, to say this is the moral thing to do. So I don't care that you invested this much of your life into this company, into these shares of this company, whether you were the founder, whether you bought into it, whether you were an investor, whatever, whether you're just, you know, in a money market account as part of your retirement that happens to invest in these companies, which that's
See,
where a lot of these companies' money comes from.
this is where the current winds of politics are throwing you off. Because if conservatism was in power, it would be on the right. Again, these scores adjust per what gets their way.
I disagree with that.
If the Bushes were in power, as these things were already climbing when the Bushes were in power, conservatism was used. If the
No, I have to completely disagree with you there. There were elements.
The monkey wrench in the cog was Trump.
There were similar sentiments and elements from the right in the, especially in the war on terror era during the Bush administration, of you're either with us or against us, and using, patriotism as a cudgel to try and score political points.
Yeah,
but it wasn't on this level at all.
It was the same goal, different. Now, I will say probably harder to do it on the conservative side because conservatives just kind of want to go about their lives. But at the same time, when it can be used, it will be used. You're saying left. The left are the useful idiots. It's that elite.
No, it's yes, the people going along with it on the left are the useful idiots, but the people pushing this are pushing a leftist ideology. They are pushing a communal totalitarian ideology.
Not because they want that, because they know it's going to basically lock in, it's going to distract the little people for
No,
them
that's
to
exactly
lock
why
in
they
their
want
global.
it. The World Economic Forum people want the control so that they can push the buttons and pull the strings because they're smarter than everyone else. And it just so happens that it will keep them comfortable and elite and wealthy.
See, again, this is where you're being biased here because we are only in this situation because of damn Patriot Act shit.
Not only.
Not only, but that was a huge step in locking us in place.
That was
playing on the terror and locking in authoritarianism. Both sides, the elites on both sides want authoritarianism. And they're working together to get it, and everybody on the bottom is fighting each other over it. The right doesn't get up and move like the left does. The left is it's always been all about protesting and demonstrating. And so they're using them differently, but they're still using both sides.
The Patriot Act was a tool and it created a mechanism. It was kind of a dry run accidentally, I think, certainly on the people who did it. But then I don't think the World Economic Forum totalitarian people even realized the potential of what they were doing until China showed them how to do it. What the Patriot Act did is it created the underlying mechanism, not just, like the cell phone monitoring, which is what a lot of people know about, but there was a lot of banking stuff in there that people don't realize that is what laid the foundation for the nonsense, like PayPal saying was it PayPal who, accidentally said that they were going to fine you for misinformation. I don't know what PayPal has to do with that anyway, but
they were gonna pull $2,500.
And there have been other financial organizations that said they're not going to process, this or that particular thing. Well, the ability to do that, a lot of that comes from the Patriot Act. The information made available to the powers that be. And I think I've mentioned this before too, is that there was a train of thought during the Cold War that technology would ultimately set people free. That as technology grew, especially information technology, it would be impossible for totalitarian governments to keep the people oppressed. China showed that the opposite is possible, that information technology can allow you to monitor and control a population in ways never before thought possible.
Well, it's deeper than just the Patriot Act, although it's part of it. It is. It was kind of the maybe not the first steps, but huge steps in using the FBI and CIA and the DOJ as a weapon against your enemies. I mean, this stuff that's happening to domestic terrorists has been happening to any what they would label potential terrorist cell in the United States and framing people. The FBI was going in and framing people just to keep this fear alive.
Also, something a lot of people don't know, the Watergate break-in was bad, but when the tapes came out, that's when they were going to impeach Nixon. And the biggest thing that came out on those tapes that led to Nixon even losing support from the Republican side, and he was going to get impeached, was simply talking about and threatening to use the IRS against his political enemies. He never actually did it, but just talking about it was enough for people at the time to say, no, he's got to go.
Well, I think we've been our skin's been thickened involuntarily. I think talking about it is enough to say he's got to go.
It should be, but now it's actually being done.
That's what I'm saying. Our skin's gotten so thick that we're just, oh well, it's not me.
Well, and there's also the team jersey politics to it too, of, well, it's okay when my side does it. It's okay to use the FBI to raid Trump, even though it's unprecedented, because he's unprecedentedly bad. Okay, fine. But the point about China is, do you remember the series Black Mirror?
Yeah.
I think it only lasted a season. I know it only
about 3 of them. I didn't watch the whole thing all the way through.
The creator said that one of the reasons the series died is because he couldn't keep ahead of real life. And one of the episodes was about a social credit score. And it came out of just kind of initial rumors and stories coming out of China, because they had what they called a social credit score, and they still have, and it is becoming more and more rigid and authoritarian there. Well, that's what this is. So they're couching it in language that makes it sound moral and nice, and this is what good people should do. But it's not any different than the social credit score that's being imposed from the communist authoritarians. It's just being fluffed up in nicer language that's more palatable to people in the West.
Well, since Xi is part of the WEF, I mean, again, this has been going on a long time. You said we've learned it from China. Well, put a different spin on it and say, are we dry running this on China? Or are they, I should say, not us, because we're the little people. But are they dry running this on China because China was set up to do it a lot better because they were a more communal society?
I think the techniques that China has been using for, surveillance, and then the social credit idea, I think their techniques have been purposely studied and then reapplied, repackaged, rather is a better way to say it, repackaged for the West.
Mm-hmm. And I think the one thing they're struggling with is getting a whole population to go along with it. The best they've done is 40-something%, because you can't even say 50-50, because there's still those disaffected people that vote both ways or don't vote at all or whatever. So
and that's one of the reasons this jumped out at me, besides I wanted to troll you because I know you like the Witcher games and I never got around to playing them. But one of the reasons
theoretically I only played one, the last one.
That's right. Yeah, you played 3. One of the reasons this jumped out at me is it's it's kind of a smaller company. This isn't like, Visa or Exxon coming out and doing this. This is kind of a smaller company. It's Eastern European. Eastern Europe, Poland and Hungary have tended to be more like, kind of like how the Cuban American population in Miami is much more right-leaning than a lot of other people because they more recently experienced leftist totalitarianism. So they had tended more towards, the right. And now you see the brazen and blatant touting of ESG coming from them. And this is their chief financial officer. This is a big dude, in company hierarchy who's doing this and laying it all out completely unashamed. No more hiding it. It's just, no, here it is. All right, let me get back to the fun here.
We got make sure we remember to talk a little Elon because he's really important in this conversation.
Yeah.
Identified in a relevance survey, which we carried out for the first time in 2021. The survey produced a list of ESG topics regarded as important for CD Projekt. Our approach to these topics and the way we go about managing them have since been described in our first sustainability report covering the year 2021. And now, let's begin with our products. Although this is perhaps not the first thing that comes to mind when thinking about video games and ESG, we believe that our primary means of influencing the world at large is by developing games which can enrich gamers' perceptions.
So they're flat out saying the point of this is to change your mind, is to make you a better person, to bring you over to our ideology. What about making good games, dude? Shouldn't that be the goal of a video game company? First thing first, make a good freaking game.
Mm-hmm.
This is why we do not shy away from confronting socially important topics in the stories we tell. Our games depict social inequalities, the various paths people take through life, and the problems they face. We want to make sure that the characters populating the worlds we create represent a diverse set of mindsets, social groups, and backgrounds. In The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, we tackled the issue of domestic violence, strained family relationships, and discrimination. Cyberpunk.
How do you feel about that? Did you get a good lecture on social discrimination?
No, not really. They kind of make you feel sorry for the guy that beat the shit out of his wife. I mean, unless that's what they're going for. I mean, they're also going for pedophilia, so it's
well, and from what I understand, the Witcher is kind of a male horn dog power fantasy because women can't resist him. So there's lots of sexy time in the games and in the books.
Well, it was one of those kind of, I guess you would call it a positive stigma, is there was this air of Witchers must be better in bed. And so women were throwing themselves at him. It wasn't necessarily his charm. It was this, this must be true, and I need to find out for myself.
Yeah, I thought there was something about the alchemical process that makes them Witchers that like made them somehow irresistible, or maybe that was just part of the lore and wasn't actually true in game.
They're sterile, so no harm, no foul. But
there's also
something they would be resilient to STDs because of their resiliency to disease. I don't know. Yeah. So no kids, and you're not likely to get an STD. Okay, no harm, no foul.
That's handy.
Give it a roll.
Well, I haven't played them, but one of the things that jumped out to me is how self-righteous and disingenuous it seems to me, because it's not like this is new, guys. It's not like you were, the first people to talk about social issues in games. I mean, they're about to bring up Cyberpunk here, and which I haven't played, but keep in mind, Cyberpunk bombed horribly. Because I think this is important when he's talking about the importance of ESG and You made a game that by numerous accounts was literally unplayable because it was so buggy, because you didn't bother to finish the game before it launched, and it bombed.
Well, see, and they even did it poorly in Witcher to get their message. I'm saying not. It was actually a good game. It was so you saw Ciri there, and you get the whole strong female character, but yet she's badass and beats people up. But she's also got this like extra elder blood in her that makes her like super badass to begin with. And she like crushes things with her bare hand. And you know, it's not like she's a normal girl.
Yeah, just like The Witcher's not just like a normal
Dude, yeah.
warrior who just got really good at fighting. No, he has this special magical concoction that makes him literally superhuman.
Yeah.
So yeah, your message on that end is failing. But okay, so oh wow, elves are, a slave race and discriminated against, right? They did that in Dragon Age 2. They've done it in other fantasy settings, I know. Can't think of any off the top of my head, because they aren't the ones that I've read. But I know from other people talking about it that it's been done before.
But even if you're trying to spread a social message that is supposed to enlighten people, oh my gosh, people from different areas that look different than each other and have different cultures are going to have difficulty getting along sometimes. That's never happened in the world
Yeah.
before, and
Yeah,
it's never going to happen again.
What year is Final Fantasy VII released? 97, I want to say.
No, it was like, yeah, because I was living with you when it was about to release, so it was 97, 98.
Yeah, so
I remember watching the commercials with you at your house.
and that was a huge deal because the
Yeah.
cinematics were so amazing.
And they changed the way they did music and everything.
Mhm.
It was
That game was all about the inequities between a rich elite and a poverty-stricken lower class, and there were major environmental messages in it.
which
And
is
that
funny. You bring up a message about the rich elite against the poverty-stricken class, and the people who are spreading this message are trying to become the rich elite with a poverty-stricken class.
Mhm.
So, I mean, if
Yep.
you're training us for something, you're training us to fight you, except you're
Yes.
distracting us in the process. But
Never forget, when you hear people talking about ESG, this is coming from the same group of people that said you will own nothing and you will like it.
and the same people who are buying up every bit of farmland in the US and saying you should eat bugs
Mm-hmm.
because meat kills the environment somehow.
Cow farts.
Cow farts.
2077, on the other hand, addresses alienation and dehumanization of society. Our products reach millions of people around the world, so we want to focus on what's important and encourage gamers to reflect upon the choices that surround them.
Okay, if you don't know what this is, there's a new series on Netflix called Cyberpunk Edge Runners, and it takes place in that universe. And I've watched the first couple episodes and I just haven't had time to go back to it. But this saved the game. This saved the Cyberpunk game because it reinvigorated interest in the game. And they've put in enough patches, it's at least somewhat playable from what I understand. And this has an actual story and animated nakedness in it. So that's why it's big. And then it made people say, oh, I wonder if the game's playable yet, and go back to the game. So it had nothing to do with your ESG nonsense. It was somebody actually wrote a compelling story.
The second important aspect relates to our team. We strive to ensure that we are a company people love working at. We give our team members the opportunity to engage in ambitious projects and pursue unique career development paths. This involves a range of internal training courses as well as our brainchild, the Promised Land Art Festival, whose 4th edition was held.
Is it just me, or does Promised Land sound kind of like a creepy dystopian thing?
Yeah, well, you can almost like make this, you know how like the old RoboCop movies and stuff would sometimes open up with a commercial. This looks like one of those commercials.
Yikes.
Held this year. The festival provides a unique opportunity for motion picture, gaming, and other creative industry professionals who represent various companies, nationalities, and market segments to get to know one another and swap ideas and learnings. In addition, our team members regularly share their experience and knowledge at local and international gaming events. Together, we create a diverse and inclusive work environment of which we are very proud.
Okay, except hold on a second. The whole point of all of that garbage you just said had nothing to do with the garbage you're saying now. The whole point of those kinds of work related conferences and competitions is to push your skills, to let to improve the skill sets of the creatives and see who's see who will rise to the top, who can put forth the best ideas, who can put forth the best product. It has nothing to do with diversity. It has everything to do with the quality of the ideas and the products that you can create.
But he's saying the words, Heath.
But he's saying the words.
He's saying the words.
He's checking the boxes. And he has the
rainbow on his world.
The nonsense flag on his shirt. Good for you.
In pursuing highly complex creative projects, we recognize the need to ensure a friendly and comfortable work environment. From 2022 onward, this applies to both the team members who work mainly from our offices, as well as those who opt to work in the remote-first model. The launch of Cyberpunk 2077
was a disaster.
and the course of the pandemic have taught us a lot. We drew conclusions and rolled out a wide array of changes. We intend to continue to further improve our company. Thirdly, our corporate premises and environment. 3 years ago, we purchased a property complex which houses our headquarters and began work on creating a green campus. These changes are being progressively implemented. They involve combining elements of the existing layout with expanded green areas and novel technologies aimed at reducing our emissions and environmental impact. In late August, we adopted an environmental policy.
It's good because you'll be burning wood this winter.
Progressively improve our environmental management system. This year, for the first time ever, we calculated our carbon footprint, and we are also working on a broader calculation covering our entire value chain. The next step will be to develop an emissions reduction program with a view towards achieving carbon neutrality. And the next important thing, our values and corporate governance.
Okay, before we get to the values and corporate governance.
Every developed country has reduced their carbon footprint, by the way, over the last 20 years.
You know who hasn't?
China. Okay, every Western country, I should say.
They are
but
they are building coal-fired plants left and right.
China, India, some parts of the Middle East, some parts of Africa still, though that's modernizing as we were speaking before, but kind of put on hold now because you're not allowed to. But oh God, what was the country? NATO the UN said they couldn't build any more coal plants, and it's now ordering coal from this country in Africa.
In large part because they won't build any zero emissions power plants. By zero emissions, I mean nuclear. They'll
just shut down the ones they already have too.
Exactly. And France was the leader in nuclear power for a long time, and they have not built a new one in a long time and are slowly drawing down their nuclear power. It's one of the things that has kept France afloat for a long time, because it's a lot of upfront money, but once you build a fission reactor, it runs very cheaply and it is zero emissions. And the waste product is not what people thinks it is. It produces very little nuclear waste, and there have been efforts to create
is,
technologies
yeah.
that eat the waste.
There is a danger to it, but typically, with Fukushima aside, typically things go pretty swimmingly, and it does create very little waste. Now, the little waste it does leave lasts for 200,000 years, but
And because it's big and scary and has the word nuclear in it, people focus on it, and nobody talks about how many people die in coal mining, coal processing, um, coal power plants, electricity
I don't
production
even think we need to
on
go
the whole
there.
chain.
In their own house because they have wood burning heaters.
And then, well, then you got. I'm bringing up coal because coal is still the largest producer of electricity around the world.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's so easy to get, and it's so easy to build a plant that burns it. And there's a lot of potential energy in a hunk of coal. There's a lot of potential energy in those carbon connections. But the reason I paused it is because the buzzword of the environmental part of this, the buzzword has for years been sustainability. If you truly want something to be sustainable, then you cannot subsidize it. Because by definition, if you give something a subsidy, it's not sustainable because it cannot be done on its own. It has to be propped up. Solar panels are a good symbol of that, because the panels themselves and the batteries required to make them worthwhile are not sustainable without major subsidization, because one, they don't last that long. Solar panels only have a lifespan of 20 to 30 years. Two, they're made with a lot of rare earth metals, which, as their name suggests, are rare, which means they're expensive, which means they're difficult to find and produce. And the places where they're often found, China and Africa, are places that don't care about the environmental friendliness of their mining techniques or their smelting techniques. They're also, that's just, the mining is bad in and of itself, but then the smelting and refining techniques are really nasty. So if you really want to be green, CD Projekt Red, then you would focus on being as unsubsidized as possible. You would focus on things that don't require a lot of rare items that require environmentally unfriendly methods to procure and produce.
This is a lithium mine, by the way.
Mm-hmm. You know, lithium batteries, that thing.
Yeah. So we have lots of lithium in Idaho, but somehow, for some reason, our citizens don't want that in their backyard. So it's kind of cool to just kind of like pretend it doesn't exist when it's in Africa or Southeast Asia.
Yep. All right, this is almost done here. And he's getting on to the G here of governance.
In going about our business, we do things that CD Projekt Red way, not necessarily adopting schematic approaches. At the same time, we make sure we are compliant with regulations and, first and foremost, transparent. Open dialogue with our teams, responsible communication with gamers, and improving our ESG disclosures are the cornerstones of our strategy for building long-term, trust-based relationships.
Really? Is that why so many of
also
your
work
early
to ensure
creatives
a
left?
strong foundation for our business in the areas of IP protection, privacy, and cybersecurity. We constantly monitor and update our internal procedures and tools related to those aspects. Finally, we feel a broader sense of responsibility in terms of reacting to events around us. We care and we get actively involved in the face of extraordinary circumstances, such as the COVID pandemic or the war in Ukraine. We also intend to
What does
be
a video
socially
game company
active
have to do
on a
with the war in
daily
Ukraine?
basis. A good example of this approach would be the already second edition of our scholarship and mentoring program called Dziewczyny w grze, Girls in the Game. It's aimed at talented girls who are considering a career in the gaming industry. Summing up, our key ESG ambitions are to provoke reflections through the memorable stories we tell in our games, to be a company people want to be part of, to continue the green transformation on our campus and beyond, to build relationships based on trust and transparency, to use our resources and competencies to support others.
All right, I'm gonna pause it here for a second because so this first one really jumps out at me as someone who likes to write and who likes to read and play good stories, provoke reflection through memorable stories. If that's your starting point, go back and watch our rant of our pre Wheel of Time expectations. The first video we did where we were just looking at the trailers and the news that had come out, and we were annoyingly spot on about what we thought was going to come out of that. Because if your focus is checking boxes, then you're not going to make a memorable story unless it's memorably bad. The story comes first, and the story, to be compelling, will have thought-provoking elements to it, unless it's just, a popcorn spectacle. But even then, there has to be some sort of connective tissue. There's a reason why the first Independence Day was a big summer hit and the second one was a flop.
There was a second one?
There was a second one, and the story was a hot mess and it flopped.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Glad I didn't know about it because I probably would have spent the 2 hours to watch it.
Even if it's just spectacle, it's still got to make sense. It's still got to have the connective tissue of a story and of real characters. So if your goal is to check boxes, and the other thing is provoke reflection, that just, to me, the thing that jumps out in my mind is the annoying comment of our characters or our stories or our world should reflect the world as it is today. No, it's not. It's, when creatives say that to justify, race and gender swapping, you're not reflecting the world. You're reflecting your little Hollywood circle. This isn't the world. This is you and your pals. And if that's what you're trying to reflect, well, then you're not actually going to reflect the world, or a world in the case of The Witcher. The Witcher works because it has depth. The same reason The Lord of the Rings worked, because Tolkien in creating all that nerdy stuff, the genealogies, the geography, the language, he made something that had depth. Even though you were reading a 2D page, it had 3 dimensions, because you got even if you didn't know in a scholarly nerdy sense, you at least got a sense of the depth of that world.
Well, and again, he's just saying the words, because having played the
Yes.
game, we'll go back to the drunken wife beater. There's no reflection on real life there. It's just something that does happen in real life. And in the game, you have to make some tough decisions because you have to go, you need this guy to go forward in the game. And you're basically just kind of left with a bad taste in your mouth, but that has nothing to do with what the game made you aware of. In fact,
hilarious.
it actually maybe more celebrated the bad behavior than it did. I mean, in real life, you just have nothing to do with that guy. I mean, at least you get to beat him up in the game while he's drunk, but you still don't, you still end up helping him in getting what you need from him to continue the story.
And in the real world, in their world, in this guy's world that he's espousing, there is no gray. You're either with us or against us. There aren't, sometimes people have to make bad decisions. It's no, you did a bad thing. Now you have to be ostracized from society. Your social credit score, your ESG score has to be destroyed because you did a bad thing. It doesn't matter why you did the bad thing. The circumstances and the context don't matter. And then the trust and transparency. There were a lot of stories after Cyberpunk came out about the harsh work environment that was created as CD Projekt Red tried to push that game out. And even before this nonsense, I've been hearing from a lot of Witcher fans that they don't expect much going forward because a lot of the important developers from Witcher 3 and earlier left because the to use the favorite word of these people, the environment, the work environment at CD Projekt Red was becoming toxic.
As it does every time you have some sort of social training or maneuvering within the company.
Because there's no gray. It's black and white. It's you're with us or you're against us.
Well, and it's deeper than that. And this is something that came through the literature and what was going on in the Summer of Love, which is when I was really deep down in it, when they were doing all these it had been going on for a while, but it was really getting intense because it became the S. It was part of the S before, but for a time after George Floyd, it was the S.
Yeah.
And people were being taught, people who were otherwise working together well and getting along were being taught why they shouldn't like each other. And that's just the reality of it. You look at these trainings and look at the result that happened, or what resulted from them, and it created an environment of, at minimum, annoyance, where white people were trying to shed their white guilt, and people of color were like, yeah, dude, I'm still Ted, like we used to be. Or on the flip side, spouses going home, mixed race spouses going home to their spouse and telling them exactly how racist they are. And it's like, you knew this person, you married this person, everything was going good until you learned about your internalized oppression.
That's pretty obnoxious. And I put a pin in the race part because I've got something else that I want to go to lead into the race part of this. But just real quick, last thing on this, we've seen enough of that, but I wanted to look something up real quick here because the video mentioned something that really grates at me, which was their women in games thing. Okay. Now, granted, this doesn't show this doesn't show degrees, and males tend more towards the technical side, but where is this? Percentage of the US population who have completed 4 years of college or more. Okay. So 2016 it crossed over. So there's a greater percentage for the past 6 years. There has been a greater percentage of the female population with a college degree than males. So the ESG stuff and the buzzwords are still focused on women in technology, women in college. But what about the guys who are no longer going to college, which is a growing percentage?
Oh, it's growing exponentially. That's going to really flip because I think it's 3-2 right now. And in some places, 2-1 girl to guy ratio in college and university. So, and there's lots of theories about it, why it is, whether it's the recruiting process or the fact that guys are just getting a clue and realizing that I could go be a welder and or work on a line, telephone line, and not have 6 figures of debt and make more than that person coming out of school. We need to, we'll get deeper into this because this is along some of the lines of stuff I was talking about with young men the other day. There are some deep rooted problems that would be addressed here, and it's actually a very touchy subject because, yeah, this is when equity goes wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I've got another video clip here that's more on the racial side of the S of the social. If you want to get into that, or do you want to pause for a second?
Yeah, let's pause for a second for station identification.
Okay. All right. So this is an interesting clip that's going to have a couple of things in it to talk about. But be warned, it might make you a Tampa Bay fan.
Oh, is this the Bowles?
Mm-hmm.
I haven't gotten to watch it yet, so okay.
Coach, you and Mike Tomlin are two of the few black head coaches in the league. I wonder what your relationship is like with them and your thoughts on Steve Wilkes joining that fold.
I have a very good relationship with Tomlin. We don't look at what color we are when we coach against each other. We just know each other. I have a lot of very good white friends that coach in this league as well, and I don't think it's a big deal as far as us being coaching against each other. I think it's normal. Wilkes got an opportunity to do a good job. Hopefully he does it. And we coach ball. We don't look at color.
Unsatisfied with his answer,
So that seemed pretty straightforward to me, but someone asked a follow-up question because Coach Bowles was guilty of some wrong-think there.
take a listen.
But you also understand that representation matters too, right? And that when young aspiring coaches or even football players, they see you guys, they see someone that looks like them, maybe grew up like them, that has to mean something.
Well, when you say you see you guys and look like them and grow up like them, means that we're oddballs to begin with. And I think the minute you guys stop making a big deal about it, everybody else will as well.
Don't.
All right. I want to stop there for a second. There's something about Whitlock's reaction here that I want to get into.
Okay, I had that queued up. I haven't gotten to watch it yet though.
So I haven't watched the whole thing. I've just watched that bit there and kind of fell over laughing. Well, let me ask you, what are some things that jump out at you about that exchange there?
Well, we
with
need to see
Bowles
more
and
of it. We need to see more of it. More of these ridiculous reporters and pundits being shot down by the people who earned their success where they're at. And and this is a good stage for it because it's not someone like John McWhorter who can be pushed aside into his academic hidey hole and relegated to only conservative media, even though he avoids conservative media. So he's in his hidey hole. There's no way they could have censored that. He is on the podium after his big game in the National Football League. It's out there for everybody. And we need to see more of it because these are the things that are going to flip the switch. Yes, as much as we would like to talk, we do have to face the reality that people are going to see this before they hear our words.
Right.
And even though his whole stance is downplaying the fact that of the colors, it does need to come from his mouth because people will listen to it.
Well, there's two great things that he does there. In the first clip, he downplays it and he says, "Look, we coach ball. We don't look at color, So he downplays it. But then the second thing the thing that jumps out at me is then in the next part, the powers that the people that push this, what we're talking about here, CRT, ESG, all of that ideology. This is what I was talking about, where there is no gray area. You're with us or you're against us. And so despite their rhetoric, despite the fluff of their language, like we were talking about with CD Projekt Red and the reality versus what that guy was saying, here comes this white woman to explain to this black man how he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Awful, for those that remember what that term is, an awful.
So here she comes to white-splain to this black man that, no, you don't understand. Representation matters, right? It's so freaking condescending. There is so much condescension in her question. I can't remember her name. She's an ESPN reporter. And there's so much condescension in her question, but not just condescension, but there is an air of authoritarianism to it. It's but we're right, right?
You
It would
can
be a
hear
shame.
you can hear in the undertone Joe Biden saying, "If you don't vote for me, you're not black."
There is an air of threat there
Yeah.
of this matters or you'll get canceled, right?
Mm-hmm.
You
Get
don't
in
want us
line.
you don't want us coming after you like we came after Aikman for his take the dresses off comment, right? Because representation matters, right?
Well, and it's the same excuse they're using when they're basically recycling any old successful entertainment production, and then making it diverse and inclusive. But representation matters. So, when you see a black Ariel, some young black girl knows she can be a Disney princess or something. It's the same excuse being used when really it's we're going to take something that was already successful so we can grab those fans. We're going to make it inclusive so we can try to grab some more fans. And if you don't want to see it, you're a bigot. So therefore, if you don't want to be a bigot, come pay money to us so you can see this thing that's probably a piece of crap, like the new Scooby-Doo coming out.
Oh, geez, yeah.
Excuse me, Velma. It's Velma, not Scooby-Doo. And everybody, all the little useful idiots supporting it, saying, well, we used to do this in the past with white actors. It's like, yeah, we did, but we stopped.
Yeah,
Long
John Wayne as
freaking
Genghis
time
Khan was a
ago.
terrible
Yeah.
idea and a terrible movie.
It changed a long time ago. To do it in reverse just for a money grab. And you little person that's going to go see this because it's this, and then you're going to argue with all your friends who think it's ruining it because this social issue. You're basically helping multi-billionaires line their pockets.
There's also a difference here. I think I've used this example in the past before, but in Kenneth Branagh's Much Ado About Nothing, Denzel Washington plays the prince. Okay, obviously this takes place in like Italy or something. There's kind of a throwaway line at the beginning about where it's set, but it's a comedy. It doesn't matter that a black man is playing the prince. Who cares? And he was in it because he was a fan and he wanted to do it. And I don't remember the whole story about how Branagh found out about it, and so he got him to do it. Same thing with Keanu Reeves as as uh as Denzel Washington's bastard half brother, right? Doesn't make a lot of sense, but so what? That they wanted to be in it, they did a good performance, and that's what mattered, and it's in a comedy. But if you cast me as Othello, that would be stupid because that matters. That is actually part of the story. So there's a difference between, well, this doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who plays this part, and this is the best person for the job versus we know you are purposefully doing this because, as the condescending white lady says to the black man there, representation matters.
Yeah. Well, it's not only that. It's again, it's the money grab. It's the money grab with a hammer over your head.
Yeah.
How many people saw the latest Star Wars just because they wanted to finish the Star Wars series? Because, like us, they were fans of the original 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Based on the box office, about half the people that saw the first one, because the Force Awakens versus the Last Jedi, I think it was almost exactly half.
But it's still probably half again more than would have gone and seen the movie not knowing what it was, just seeing the trailer.
Yeah. Because it was still like a little over $1 billion, because I think the Force Awakens was a little over 2 billion, Last Jedi was a little over $1 billion, and then the crappy one in the middle was about in the middle of the box office too.
Same with Lord of the Rings, the Prime version. Wheel of Time is a little bit different because it doesn't have a screen version before it.
Yeah.
But it's just regurgitating, making it this, and then not only just grabbing the crowd of people who are going to go see it because of those first 4 words, Lord of the Rings, but also because it's in this fantasy genre that they typically love. If it was about making a good show with an inclusive cast without the money grab, you would just make a movie.
Have you
You would
heard
just
people come?
Yeah, you would just make a movie with elves and halflings and dwarves. You wouldn't call it Lord of the Rings. You just
Have
make a movie.
There were a lot of people complaining about the first trailer to House of Dragon because there was a black guy playing a Targaryen, and the Targaryen, by the lore, by the books, are supposed to be almost albino in their
Mhm.
complexion. When the series came out, nobody cared anymore because it's apparently really freaking good. And at some point, I'm gonna have to watch it because it sounds really good.
Yeah, I think we got to parse things here, though. We can give them credit for making a good show, while still calling the bullshit on why they did the things they
Yes,
did.
yes,
So
yes, we can
we could say,
absolutely.
you know, someone could take a bullshit shot in basketball and still hit the and still score. You
Mhm,
know, it's
mhm.
you can still call out bullshit and say, well, you did good this time. You know,
Yeah.
clock's right twice a day, right? Broken clock.
Yes. Although apparently from what the people I watch have been saying, the nonsense the activists are saying, the activist creators and actors are saying about the show, all the people I've watched have said, well, I mean, you could interpret that scene that way, but it's not saying it directly. You could also interpret it this way. So there is an element of that too that makes me think that you're right in that, at least in House of the Dragon, there's a big part of it is the money grab of let's check these boxes so we can get these people too.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Well, I say that they were going to make House of the Dragon no matter what. So it's not a money grab using House of the Dragon. This is more the environment they're in, and I don't blame producers 100%. I blame the industry as a whole,
well,
because in order
there's
to be eligible for a lot of things, you have to check the boxes now.
it, and there is definitely, you know, looking from the outside, looking at House of the Dragon, it does make you think there some element involved in that production was, go back to the CD Projekt video, he said blatantly, we're trying to influence our customers.
Mm-hmm.
So there was an ESG element to some degree there because they were trying to influence the watcher, the viewer, towards their ideology in in a in a slightly less subtle way than this white lady trying to influence Todd Bowles to get the answer that's correct, to get the correct answer here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we could probably, even if we look carefully enough, see where this occurs. I think in the case of House of the Dragon, it's almost like we're making this project, and then these requirements are pushed on us.
Mm-hmm.
So let's try to ride that wave. Not ride the wave. That's a bad term, because that would be the money grab.
Yeah.
Let's try to do the things we have to do, but still make a great product in the process. Where what you're talking about is, we don't care about the product. Here's the message. If something good happens to come out of it, then it does. And who knows? Since Witcher 3 was actually decent, maybe they were in the first boat before, but now they're full on in now. Who knows? There
Yeah.
might be a progression to this, because I mean, we're not in that industry. You know, if I didn't work for myself, I'm sure I would have pressures to do things differently than the way I do them. Even though I get great results the way I do them, it would be, hey, our brand does this. You need to do more of this. Okay, like when I worked for Velocity, I had to, even with the old soccer moms, I had to pull the ladders out and hurdle drills and stuff like that, because we trained them like athletes. You know, I do a lot less of that now because it's not as efficient for what we're trying to do.
Yeah. Yeah. There are better ways to do it. But yeah, you're right in this is part of our brand. I think that's a lot of what's wrong with Prime and why it's not likely to get better. Because if you look at Salk, the lady who's in charge, and I've talked about her a little bit, she's the one who killed Conan, even though it was well into pre-production, because it was too toxically masculine.
Yeah,
And
you know,
that
barbarians
trickles down. Yeah.
Barbarians toxically masculine. Who would have thought? In fact, that's like you can still consider it a negative trait how toxically masculine they are, but they're still damn freaking barbarians.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's not always shown in a positive light. But
Again,
that
we can have flaws with the main characters.
I feel like there must be, perhaps because Warner Brothers, which owns HBO, was in such turmoil the past few years, to the extent that it ultimately got bought out by Discovery, merged with. It makes me think that that production team must have been able to work semi-autonomously versus it really looks like, and from seeing some of the showrunners talking about it, it looks like uh, Rings of Power and Wheel of Time were much more hands-on from the top. And so I think that's why they're so disastrously woke, and House of the Dragon was able to focus more on story and character
Mhm.
and not box checking. But if you have nothing else to go from there, I want to go back to this clip here and play a little bit of Whitlock's reaction here and get your reaction to that, because he says some things that are interesting to me, and I want to know what you think about them. All right, so here we go.
37 years ago, I set my sights on being the next Mike Royko. It never crossed my mind that I couldn't do it because of my skin color or Royko's. I saw a man having phenomenal success in an industry I wanted to enter. I thought I could do it too. What has changed in the last 4 decades? Barack Obama wanted to be the president of the United States. Did he need to see another half-black man become president before realizing he could do it? You know what matters more than representation? Belief in yourself. The foundation for self-belief, aka self-confidence, is belief in God, a belief that you are made in God's image. Skin color loses relevance when you authentically believe we were all created by the same higher power. The secular worldview undermines self-confidence. It reduces people to skin colors, genders, and sexual preferences.
So that's where I was going to tie it back into Sunday school there.
Yeah, I picked that up pretty quickly there.
Did you?
Yeah. So disagreeing with where the source material comes from, then yes, self-respect and self-esteem are the basis for it. I did want to bring up Barack Obama earlier because I said we need more of this. We needed it then.
Yeah.
Yes, it's great to have that moment of celebration that yes, I am the first black man to be elected to this given the history of our country. Great, acknowledge that. And then to work, and the next time someone asks you about it, I'm just the president.
But instead, he said, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon Martin.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I said we need more of that. And he went the opposite direction.
Instead, he said the white cop acted stupidly without knowing a damn thing about the case.
Well, you know why he went the opposite direction? Because he's the one that bailed out the banks that caused Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party. He had to get us fighting again.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Because
it was
he's
all
one
about
of the
divide and
elites.
conquer. Divide and conquer is part of the, as Whitlock put it, the secular worldview that splits you up and wants to define you by your characteristics, not by who you are as an individual. And the consequence of that is to destroy the individual. If and we've talked about this, and you've shown data on this, and you've shown their own words in the CRT literature, is what does it do to a young black man when you are constantly told that you cannot get ahead because the system is rigged against you?
Mm-hmm.
That the cops are out to get you, that anyone who is white is inherently racist against you. What does that do? Well, we've seen it. It's patently obvious. Well, where does that come from? It comes from reducing someone to something as inconsequential as the color of their skin.
Well, and it's not just self-confidence like Whitlock says. It's, when you talk about the Bowles situation or whatever, it needs to be the people that are speaking out like that need to take it a step further and highlight the traits that help them get where they are.
Yes.
Because this is a trait, but it didn't help them get where they are.
Bowles is a really good example too, because getting to that position, I mean, there are only 32 NFL coaches in the whole world, right? And
Head coach.
head coaches.
Lots
and
of coaches.
To get to that point, you have to go through a very grueling process that at the beginning isn't going to pay off. Because when you're down on the graduate assistant, or the assistant to the assistant level, that very, very bottom tier of coaching, it is not going to pay off. It's not going to be fun. You're not going to be making money. And if you fall into that secular worldview trap, well, why bother? Because the system is rigged against me anyway. So why am I putting up with this crap?
Well, it takes away the self-evaluation that leads to success. Because if roadblocks come in, end up in your way while you're still in that part of your career where almost everything's a roadblock, and you start talking about the system inherent against you because of the color of your skin, you are blind to everything that you need to work on to get better at what you do. Because it's not the fact that I'm, sleeping too late. It's not the fact that I'm not taking care of my health, and so I'm making bad decisions based on that. It's not the fact that the other coaches are studying 3 hours more a week than I am. It's not the fact that I'm doing all of the name any number of things that can get in the way. It's not the fact that I drink too much. Anything that can get in the way. It's this other thing that I can't prove.
Men are evil. Men are toxic. Men suck, because I've had 12 boyfriends and none of them have lasted longer than a month. Have you considered the problem is you? There's a common denominator here, but if women are oppressed and masculinity is toxic, then no, there's going to be no self-evaluation there. And there needs to be, or you're going to be unhappy. You're going to be miserable and lonely for the rest of your life. If you don't have that self-evaluation that you were just talking about, then, and you want to achieve X, well, you're not going to if you don't honestly evaluate who you are and where you are, and thus what it's going to take to get there.
Or this goes a number of ways. Or you basically browbeat the masculinity out of a man, and then why doesn't he ever stand up for me?
Yes. Why doesn't he ever stand up for me? Gee, I don't know. What could it possibly be? And I've said this before too, that if you cannot be inspired by the growth and the humility and the strength of George Washington because he doesn't look like you, there's something wrong with you and or your parentage. If you can't be inspired with the quiet courage that Jackie Robinson displayed in his first season in the major leagues, because he doesn't look like you, there's something wrong with you or your parentage. The looks like me, the representation is obscene. It's not just racist, because it is in those instances. It's also just anti-human in general, that you only matter based on your outward characteristics. The content of Jackie Robinson's character didn't matter. The color of his skin is what mattered. And the knock-on effects, the inspiration that he had to young players or aspiring athletes or just people, no, that didn't matter, because he could only really influence, he could only really represent to people who shared his melanin.
Mm-hmm.
That's obscene. That's disgusting.
I do hate to make that comparison too much because different day and age, different situation, where he actually lived in a day and age where it was not illegal, but
Yeah.
it was
There was a
he wasn't
gentleman's
allowed.
agreement.
Yeah, he wasn't allowed to do something, and he was so good that he could not be denied.
And
And so their color of skin did come into it because
yes.
because of the color of skin, he wasn't allowed to do that. Bowles is a different example because there's nothing stopping him from getting to the position he is other than his ability.
Yes. Yeah. And when I talk about Jackie Robinson, I mean in the last 30 years, because it was a big effing deal to black kids or black players in the Negro leagues. It was a big effing deal to them because he was literally the first. So yeah, at that time, it really mattered. We don't live in 1946. And to pretend we do is as insane as saying we live on Mars. We don't.
Yeah, well, and you look at, we'll go to quarterbacks in the NFL. There was a growing process of getting representation in that. And it wasn't the fact that coaches wouldn't play a black quarterback. It was the fact that to become an NFL quarterback, you typically had to have a quarterback's coach since you were 10 years old. And there was a class difference there. So there was some catching up to do after civil rights. And that's going to take generations. And now we've gotten to the point where these guys are doing this all of their life instead of just being a great athlete trying to jump into it.
If you want to know why that is, go find, I can't remember what it's called. I think it's like QB Confidential or something like that. Kurt Warner has a channel that's not very big. And I'm guessing it's because it's going to hurt your brain. He broke down, I accidentally found it because I was doing some searches on other stuff, and he broke down Russell Wilson on Thursday Night Football and what's going on there. And the level of detail that he goes into. And then keep in mind where he's got the clicker there. He's got the coach's clicker and the coach's tape there, and he's going through and he's circling the defenders of this and that and this and that. And so he spends 3 to 5 minutes explaining something, and then he hits the button and Russell Wilson's got 5 seconds to figure it out. Because he's saying, this is what you're looking for, and this is why. If this guy does this, this is what it means. If that guy does that, then you got to switch your read to over here, right? And you have to do all of that in 5 seconds. It's an incredibly difficult position to play. That's why it's so valued, and that's why it's so hard for anyone to get into.
Well, it's something developed over time too. It's not just the knowledge. It's instinctual after a point. Like I can watch somebody run and break it down. Whereas you haven't done sprint mechanic coaching for 15 years, you would probably have to get a time capture video and still break it down frame by frame.
It's a lot easier for me to evaluate someone's gait if they're walking. If they're running, it's a lot harder for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, I do this all the time when I watch football, just automatically is when someone like breaks a run and someone catches him from behind, I'm already watching like, well, his foot's landing too far out in front of him. He's like always deflecting his ankle. And that's why the guy could catch him from behind, even though he had that burst through the hole. And so these things become instinctual after you've done it enough. Well, that took me 15 years. Well, about 10 of those 15 years to be that quick at it. But you take a quarterback, say he's a great athlete, and senior year of high school, they run him in a triple option. Then he goes to college and he learns to pass in the pocket. And you still got only 5 years of learning this incredibly difficult thing while people are punching you in the mouth.
Yeah.
Right. Where one mistake it could be a concussion.
Yeah. Where a 330-pound man is trying to flatten you. And going back to
and unlike watching people sprint, it's different looks every time you snap the ball.
Yes. And tie it back in to what we're talking about here. If I just said, well, the system's rigged because only Polacks who have been hit on the head repeatedly can, analyze a gate like that. I'll never do it. The system's rigged. Well, then I won't. If I don't say, okay, well, how come he can do that and I can't, and evaluate the ability, evaluate the technique, and then evaluate myself, then yeah, I'm never going to be able to do that. So if you reduce it just to someone's characteristics rather than their character and or ability, then you're squashing people who otherwise might. Now, they might not, because some things are difficult and some things way more difficult than others, so they might not, but they'll at least be able to give it a shot and say, I gave it my all. But not if you're shoving them down based on their inherent characteristics, on their external looks.
Well, I've said it before in many of our social episodes. If you don't give it your all and do the things you need to do on a regular basis, and it's not, and if that's not the majority consensus amongst everybody, then we can't even identify where the racism is. Because if there's always these other variables we can attribute it to, then it's you. If you did everything and a bunch of people that look like you are doing everything and there's still a roadblock there, it's gonna be like, wow, there it is. Let's fix it. But we can't have that moment, because we're basically shooting ourselves in the foot and saying that the other person did it. Society did it, held the gun, pointed it at my foot.
And that person saying that, remember, is a condescending white woman. There's just no self-awareness when, not just the question she asked, but how she asked it. There is just zero self-awareness in that person.
Oh, there's plenty of self-awareness. She was in her critical consciousness.
Oh, well, that's true. All right. But I want to go back to the part that you don't agree with, because there's a lot of truth to what he said there. And that's something that I wanted to get into, and why I wanted to start with Genesis, is that we take for granted in the modern Western world in which we live how radical and revolutionary Genesis is for the time that it was created. That a single creator, rather than a clan or national or ethnic deity, means that we are all to some degree the same. And now, granted, there's not, because the scope and focus of the Old Testament is different, there's not the evangelism in Judaism that there is in Christianity, which is explicitly go and spread this word. But there was an inclusivity that did not really exist in the ancient world elsewhere. And a large portion of that is because there is a single creator. And as all right, as Nahum Sarna puts it, this is page 3, when he's talking about the creation account. Whether the Hebrew Genesis account was meant to be science or not, it was certainly meant to convey statements of faith. As will be shown, it is part of the biblical polemic against paganism and an introduction to the religious ideas characteristic of the whole of biblical literature. It tells us something about the nature of the one God who is the creator and supreme sovereign of the world and whose will is absolute. It asserts that God is outside the realm of nature, which is important and radical when you talk about the spiritualism and paganism of the ancient world. Continuing, which is wholly subservient to him. He has no myth. That is, there are no stories about any events in his life. Magic plays no part in the worship of him. The story also tells us something about the nature of man, a godlike creature, uniquely endowed with dignity, honor, and infinite worth, into whose hands God has entrusted mastery over his creation. And keeping in mind that when the creation account occurs in the first couple of chapters of Genesis, it's way down the road that the promise is given to Abraham. So man in general was created in God's image. And then a bunch of stuff happens, and then the chosen people of Israel are established and the laws of Moses are given out. But the idea that all of humanity was created by a single deity who exists outside of nature was a very radical idea and found nowhere else in the ancient world.
I think I have to disagree with there's no magic in the ritual. All the rituals are invoking magical qualities. Prayer itself is trying to invoke a magical quality. Ritual sacrifice was trying to invoke a magical quality. It was just abstract.
Well, no, but I think that is important, and that's my interpretation. The distinction that he's drawing there is that there's no magic in the realm of, you know, wizards and sorcerers and spells, magic spells. That there is ritual, and it is faith-based, and you are expecting an outcome from it, but it's not the same as it's magical in the kind of general and somewhat derogatory sense. It's not magical in the Dungeons and Dragons sense.
Well, no. Again, I said it's abstract, but if you prayed for a good harvest and a good harvest happened, and you say it's because my prayers came true, that's magic. But you're assigning metaphysical to what the work you did, all of these things, but it couldn't have happened unless he answered your prayers.
I still say that's different. That is, you can say it's magical in a sense, but it is not the same as the rituals of paganism, which they're much more direct. You perform these incantations, you perform these sacrifices, you draw these symbols, you make these motions with your hand, and X happens.
Except that they would say it happened because we did this, but when it didn't happen, they'd say we didn't do it good enough. Just like you do with prayer, and just like you do with sacrifice, and just like any other invocation, because they didn't do a ritual and lightning flew from their hands, even though some legends would say that.
Lightning bolt, lightning bolt.
It's the same thing. I mean, don't confuse what happened in real life in ancient religions versus what we do in fantasy land. It still has the same result. It's just you did it to a different deity, or with a different thought in mind, a deity in mind, I should say.
Well, no, I think that's the point, because when you use prayer to try and achieve an outcome, you are making a supplication to the being who created nature and exists outside of nature. Magic with a capital M, in that sense, in the, kind of Dungeons and Dragons sense, you are trying to manipulate the elements of nature to produce an outcome yourself.
But I'm not speaking in the Dungeons and Dragons sense. I'm speaking in the ancient religions sense.
No, that's where that comes from. That's why there are some radical, crazy Christians who think that Dungeons and Dragons is the road to Satan. Dungeons and Dragons, Satan.
But the process and the result were the same. It didn't matter what their mindset was.
The process was not the same. No, that's you can say that the result was the same or the mindset was the same. The process was not the same.
Process was ritualistic, is what I'm saying. It's not that it was the same. They did the same ritual. It was ritualistic for a result, and when it would happen in their favor, they would say, "Oh, thank the gods." When it wouldn't happen in their favor, they would say, "We didn't do it right," or "The gods are not favoring us." In the Old Testament, you did the same thing, just differently. And if it happened in your favor, you said, "God favored us." If it didn't happen in your favor, you say, "Well, we didn't sacrifice good enough." And that happened a lot. Your sacrifices weren't substantial.
So that's down the road stuff, but that's a misunderstanding of the rituals and sacrifices of the law of Moses.
Well, maybe you're misunderstanding pagan rituals and sacrifices.
No, I don't think I am.
It everything's abstract because you don't have the actual spell that causes the rain to fall, or in the American Indian sense, the dance that would cause the rain to actually fall. You just kind of thought it did sometimes because it worked in your favor every once in a while. It's the same thing. You're doing a ritual, you get a result, and you attribute it to one thing or another. There was no real magic. And but it's still invoking magic the same way they used to. There is no, I want to cast a spell. There were very charismatic shamans and witch doctors and stuff that would convince you that
Yes.
they're casting a spell. But when it came to ritual for an earthly result, it's the same. Just to a different. Now, it is unique that it's to a monotheistic god versus.
It's more than monotheistic. Sarna's point here is critical, that it's not just that there is a god, it's that this being exists outside of nature.
Yeah, it's abstract. That's all it is.
That's a big effing deal.
No, it's an advancement in one way, yes, because the pagans thought that the phenomenon of nature were part of the deity, like Zeus that was thunder,
Well,
or...
and there were spirits in natural things, that there was a spirit to the Nile. That's why it flooded, and every year it says there was a spirit to the Nile. If you were taken by a Nile crocodile, there was either a spirit in that crocodile, or that had something to do with the spirit of the Nile.
No, there is an evolution to religion where the more polytheistic religions were nature based, typically, were explanatory in their nature, and it evolved into what we have nowadays, which is more moralistic in nature. Less explanatory.
That's where I'm gonna have to think of how to explain this better, and that's where I'm going with this study of Genesis. Is it was not an evolution, it was a revolution. It did not evolve into moralistic. It came out like a bolt of lightning. It was the Cambrian explosion. If you want to use evolution, then okay, fine. It was the Cambrian explosion.
It's still evolutionary. It may have been quicker at some point because of inventions like the written word or agriculture. We're gonna when you really go into Genesis, we're gonna hammer that, because Genesis itself starts with a garden. It almost tells you what brought this on. The fact that we all came together into larger societies, which shift you to a monotheistic, moralistic God versus an explanatory, reactionary set of spiritual beings. I'm not even going to say deities, because not even all tribes and cultures have deities. They have nature gods, kind of, so the shift is with the shift in society, going from tribes, hunter-gatherers, to cultivating, gardening, agricultural,
except it didn't
societies.
Do that.
It did.
Humanity did not do that. There were.
We've got fossil evidence that happened.
No, I'm saying that.
Are you a young earther now that just says all fossil evidence doesn't exist?
The move to moralism and monotheism, that did not occur with the agricultural revolution. There was still spiritualism.
No, it was, these things happen over time, thousands of years.
Even with thousands of years, the Celts of the post-Christian Roman world were still practicing in basically the same way as their Stone Age ancestors. That they had not transitioned to anything different or revolutionary.
Yeah, but they weren't to the scale as the Holy Roman Empire or the Babylonian Empire or the Byzantine Empire. They were still tribes.
Yeah. But the Babylonian Empire was still spiritualistic and
it was the first
a
steps
pagan
going along the
pantheon.
way. It was the transitionary period at some point. There's always a transition. It didn't just go from the sun is Apollo to everything is all under this one umbrella. These shifts. We're looking back at things that are thousands of years old and trying to bunch it into little pockets. And it's not going to work that way.
Well, we're going to have to get deeper into this because no, but the point was, and the reason I transitioned from what Whitlock said is because that is an element, and
It's a comforting thought.
much of where Western civilization's morality comes from the Judeo-Christian, and the Enlightenment ideals and the things that came out of that in what we consider the modern world, starting with the American Revolution and the changing of ideas that happened there. That stems from the Judeo-Christian idea, which was radical, and this is how it came from. That is because there was this radical idea that said there is a being who exists outside of nature and who created all of humanity. No matter what tribe you are, no matter what nation you are, no matter what status you are, ultimately, we were all created in God's image. Whatever you interpret that to be, that's for later. But that was a radical idea. It's why abolitionist groups were Christian groups, were preachers. It's why a lot of the ideals of liberty and freedom leading up to the American Revolution were taught from the pulpit.
If you're going to try to get me to argue that pro-social ideas aren't inherent in Christianity, then that's not going to happen. Christianity didn't create them, though. That is the key.
Christianity didn't necessarily create all of these knock-on effects, all these, modern ideas that I'm talking about, but it absolutely created the idea of a God outside of nature who created all humanity.
We'll have to explore all the world religions, but it's definitely most unique in that. Yeah.
I mostly just wanted to unpack that because at first glance, if you're someone like you're going to say no of Whitlock's idea of a belief in God versus a secular worldview, of where we get the idea of the individual and of race not mattering.
No, you could still have the same thing without saying we're made in the image of God. We can all say we're made of the same stuff. What's wrong with that? Why is that depressing? It's unifying just as anything else is.
Because as you talked about last time, humans aren't rational. Like as Sapolsky said, the question isn't why do 95% of humanity believe in a higher power and some sort of religious ideal. It's what's wrong with the other 5%. Well, because if it was switched, then yes, you could just convince people to not suck by saying, see, XYZ, or well, it's not XYZ, it's what is it? What are the letters of DNA? It's help me here.
What? The letters of what?
DNA, the double helix. It's there's like 4 things in there and the way they match up, and I can't remember the letters.
Yeah.
But so
they're amino acids, whatever.
Yeah. So here are these 4 things, and then they just match up in different ways, and that's that. Except we aren't wholly rational beings, so you're gonna have a hard time convincing people to not suck because of that.
Yeah, I think this is where one of the big disconnects with my side of the aisle here on this argument is is religious people seem to think that there's no unifying process or system to what we think. We just think it's chaos. Everything's chaos. Now, everything tends towards entropy, yes, but it's not just chaos. There has been an evolutionary process, and this includes the development of everything even before life has been a process that has led to this end, yes. And the only reason we can look back at it is because of our consciousness. It's not as nihilistic as you would think. How about that?
No, I wasn't saying a nihilism. I'm just saying that the reason you, I was going to say need, but not necessarily need, but the reason a higher power works is because of what
our
Sapolsky was saying.
consciousness. Well, because of our consciousness, it makes sense. Because of our consciousness, we're always trying to explain things. Most people can only go down to a certain level, and religion comes right in to offer that explanation.
That's a good place to leave it, because that's another place where I'll say you're wrong, and we'll get into that more next time, where we actually get into the text of Genesis. So
right.
that will be my tease for next Sunday school.
Well, when you said we weren't doing Sunday school and we were doing ESG, I prepped that instead of the others. So I'll be more prepared on this part next time.
Well, that's where I wanted to start. I wanted to talk about ESG because it's kind of the umbrella in which CRT exists, and we hadn't talked about that for a while.
Well, let me bring this up. These are all left-wing kind of journals, so they're all kind of skewed.
Mm-hmm.
But Texas did pass a law that ban is a hard word. Everybody keeps saying ban, but it doesn't say ban. But basically, there are repercussions if you're shooting our country in the foot when it comes to energy because of your ESG score. And I don't agree with everything in it. I think it might be the wrong way to fight this. But at the same time, I do appreciate that it went through the legislature and went through the proper channels instead of being some last minute executive order to try to buy votes. So there is that. I think realistically, I think the best approach needs to be shareholders need to start suing these companies.
Yeah.
Because they want to make it a stakeholder capitalist world.
You are legally obligated to focus on your shareholders.
Yeah. So everybody who owned Disney stock when they crashed because of ESG. Y'all need to be suing for the damages.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And I think that's the proper avenue. So, but at the same time, I do appreciate that at least they're trying to do something, and they did it through the proper channels.
Yes.
So good place to stop.
Good
Positive
place to
note
stop.
at the end. Yeah.
Yay.
Huzzah.
Huzzah. All right. So then we will see y'all Tuesday for more Fires of Heaven. Where did we leave off? Oh, the girls. We're back to the girls and the menagerie.
We didn't give any advice medically or anything here. Go say hi to a neighbor.
I'll give you some advice. Go read some books and study some philosophy.
There you go. All right. Talk to y'all later.